The Montana winter painted the Blackfoot Valley in shades of steel gray and pristine white, long shadows stretching across the blood-stained snow that surrounded the charred remains of the Richardson homestead. Lucas Cole stood motionless among the ruins, his father's old Schofield revolver heavy in his gloved hand as dark smoke continued rising from the smoldering wreckage. At 38, he had already weathered more loss than most men could bear. His wife Emma to smallpox in 72, young son Thomas in a tragic accident 2 years later, and now this. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The Raven Gang had been systematically targeting farms throughout the valley, their operation growing bolder as local law proved unable or unwilling to stop them. Their pattern was simple: offers of protection, followed by threats and finally orchestrated accidents for those who resisted. Lucas pulled his coat tighter against the bitter wind. His neighbors knew him only as Thomas Richardson's nephew, the quiet widower who transformed his uncle's struggling operation into one of the most prosperous ranches in the territory. What they didn't know was his true identity: Ghost Hand Cole, the man who'd brought down the infamous Whitaker gang in a legendary Dakota Territory gunfight. Mr. Cole. Young Billy Thompson came running from the direction of the main road. "Riders coming. Looks like Sheriff Morris and some deputies." Lucas straightened, unconsciously falling into the alert stance his father had taught him. "Get inside the barn, Billy. Check on Martha and make sure she's still tending to Jim's wounds. Then watch the back property line." Sheriff Morris emerged. From the swirling snow, his heavy winter coat and polished badge, a stark contrast to the destruction around them. 3 deputies flanked him, their positioning suggesting preparation for violence rather than law enforcement. "Mighty cold morning for trouble, Cole," Morris called out, his tone carefully neutral, despite his men's threatening stance. "Heard there was some excitement out here." "The Raven Gang paid us a visit," Lucas replied evenly. "Burned out my barn, shot my foreman Jim, and stole 30 heads of prime cattle, same as they did to the Peterson place last month and the Wagner farm before that." Morris's expression remained carefully blank. "Serious accusations. You sure it wasn't regular rustlers passing through?" "Regular rustlers don't leave a black feather nailed to the door before they burn a man's property. Nor do they usually have 7 men in grey dusters, led by a scarred man with a silver-plated Remington." Deputy Burke's hand drifted toward his gun. Lucas noted the movement without seeming to, his mind calculating angles and distances with practiced ease. "Thing is, Cole," Morris sighed, dropping all pretense, "Thaddeus Raven's got himself some powerful friends in the territorial capital these days. Man like that, operating with certain understandings in place, well, it complicates matters for local law enforcement." "I understand the complications, Sheriff. Just like I understand why you were nowhere to be found when the Peterson place was hit, or why no one investigated when Jim Wagner's barn mysteriously caught fire." Morris's face hardened. "Careful there. Man could take that as an accusation against the law. These are difficult times. Smart folks learn to bend with the wind, make certain accommodations. The stubborn ones," he gestured at the smoking ruins, "well, accidents happen. Billy," Lucas called to the young ranch hand, "ride into town. Tell Doc Wilson we need him out here for Jim's wounds." He paused, then added, "And stop by the telegraph office. Send a message to Michael Cole in Deadwood. Just 3 words. Lucas needs you." As the boy rode off, Lucas felt the weight of his past settling back onto his shoulders. Behind the ruined barn, hidden beneath hay bales, lay his father's old gun chest. Not just weapons, but detailed notes on every major outlaw gang in the territories, including their habits and preferred tactics. The Cole family's reputation wasn't built on violence alone, but on understanding how men thought and moved in the crucial moments before bloodshed. The sound of approaching hoofbeats drew Lucas's attention. Through the swirling snow, he spotted 3 riders approaching from the north, ranch hands from the McPherson spread. Old Donald McPherson had sold out to the Raven Gang last week after finding 2 of his prize bulls mysteriously slaughtered. "Evening, Cole," Jack McPherson called out, his once friendly voice now tinged with nervousness. "Pa wanted us to pass. Along a message. Thaddeus Raven's offering one last chance. He'll even pay fair market value for your stock, plus extra for the inconvenience." The young man's eyes darted to the smoking ruins. Lucas studied the riders carefully. The McPherson boys had been good neighbors once, before fear and greed had poisoned the valley. "Tell your father I appreciate the warning, but also tell Raven something from me." He moved with deliberate slowness, letting his coat fall open to reveal the Schofield. "Tell him to look into why they called me Ghost Hand in Dakota." The riders paled visibly. Lucas's reputation might be unknown in these parts, but clearly Raven had done some research. The McPherson boys didn't wait to reply, spurring their horses into a hasty retreat. Inside the barn, Lucas found Martha Henderson still tending to Jim's wounds. The old foreman looked up with pain-clouded eyes. "Should have seen them coming, boss. They moved like soldiers, not common bandits." "That's because some of them are," Lucas replied, checking the bandages. "I recognized at least 2 from the 7th Cavalry, deserters who rode with Raven during the Black Hills campaign." He'd spotted the telltale cavalry-style gun grips and the way they positioned their horses for maximum coverage. "Mr. Cole!" Billy burst through the barn door, his young face flushed with excitement. "Telegram came back while I was in town. Says, Iron Sight rides at dawn." Lucas felt a grim smile touch his lips. His father's response was pure Michael Cole, short, dramatic, and promising the kind of reckoning that had made their family name legendary in Dakota. The old gunfighter had been living quietly in Deadwood these past years, but Lucas knew he'd been keeping his skills sharp. Moving to the hidden gun chest, Lucas lifted out more than weapons. From a false bottom, he retrieved a leather-bound journal, filled with his father's precise handwriting. Each page detailed tactics for dealing with different types of outlaws, not just how they fought, but how they thought. The Raven Gang's military background would make them disciplined, but it also made them predictable to someone who knew what to look for. As evening settled over the valley, Lucas began his preparations. The winter wind carried the scent of more snow, which would work to his advantage. The Cole family had perfected the art of using weather and terrain against overconfident opponents. By tomorrow night, the Raven Gang would learn why his father had always said that the most dangerous predator wasn't the one that struck first, but the one that knew how to turn its prey's strength into a fatal weakness. Martha emerged from the barn, her worn face set with determination. "The Henderson place has a root cellar that's not on any property maps. My brothers used it during the war. If you need somewhere to stage from." Lucas nodded, understanding the offer's significance. The valley's honest folks were tired of living under Raven's shadow. They just needed someone willing to show them that the gang wasn't invincible. The winter sun painted the Blackfoot Valley in deepening shadows as Lucas made his final preparations. Tomorrow would bring violence. There was no avoiding that now, but it wouldn't be the simple kind of violence that Raven's men understood. The quiet rancher was about to remind the territory why the name Ghost Hand Cole had once commanded. Respect and fear in equal measure, not just for skill with a gun, but for the ability to turn an enemy's certainty into their greatest vulnerability. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Dawn painted the snow-covered Blackfoot Valley in shades of crimson and gold as Cole observed Thaddeus Raven's main camp through his father's brass spyglass. The outlaw leader had established his operation in the abandoned Silver Creek mine. its multiple tunnels and elevated position providing natural advantages for defense. "They've got sentries posted at all the high points," Lucas noted to Billy, who'd insisted on helping despite his youth. "Military spacing, overlapping fields of fire, but they're watching the obvious approaches, not the old game trails." Through the spyglass, Lucas counted 15 men in the camp, more than he'd anticipated. Raven had been recruiting. Among them moved the gang leader himself, a tall figure whose silver-plated Remington caught the morning light. The man's scarred face and precise movements marked him as someone who'd learned violence in formal military service before turning those skills to darker purposes. "Mr. Henderson's back," Billy whispered, pointing to movement in the tree line. The elderly rancher emerged from the shadows, his casual posture masking his role as one of Lucas's scouts. The network of local farmers and ranchers, tired of Raven's tyranny, had proven eager to help once they realized someone was finally willing to stand against the gang. "Raven's got 3 more men watching the supply cache in Taylor's Canyon," Henderson reported, settling behind their concealed position. "They're storing stolen cattle there before moving them north to the railroad. But there's something else. They've got prisoners. The Miller boys from Eagle's Rest." Lucas's jaw tightened. The Millers were barely 16, sons of a widow who'd refused to sell her small horse-breeding operation to Raven. Their capture explained why Sarah Miller hadn't raised an alarm about her missing sons. She was being coerced into silence. A distinctive bird call echoed from the western ridge, Martha Henderson's signal. Through the spyglass, Lucas spotted a dust cloud approaching from the direction of Deadwood. His father was right on schedule. "Your old man really coming out of retirement for this?" Henderson asked, remembering stories he'd heard about iron. "Sight cold during his own days riding shotgun on stagecoaches." "My father never believed in retirement," Lucas replied, already moving to intercept the approaching rider. "He just got tired of people assuming violence was his only skill." Michael Iron's sight coal materialized from the swirling snow like a ghost from the old days. His grey duster and distinctive matched Colts, marking him as someone who'd earned his legends. At 62, his hair might have turned silver, but his eyes remained sharp as a hawk's. "Quite a mess you've found yourself, boy," the older man noted, dismounting with fluid grace. His gaze swept the valley with professional assessment. "Military deserters turned bandits. Always a nasty combination. They've got training but no discipline." Lucas led his father to their observation post, where Henderson and Billy tried not to stare too obviously at the legendary gunfighter. "Raven's got the Miller boys hostage," Lucas explained. "Change our options." Michael studied the camp through his own spyglass. Maybe not. Tell me about their routines." "They rotate sentries every 4 hours, military style. Main force stays in the mine complex during daylight. Smaller groups handle intimidation. Runs to local farms. They're organized but predictable. Like to hit targets at dawn, using the rising sun to blind defenders. Just like Hancock trained his cavalry scouts." Michael nodded. "Raven was probably an officer before deserting. Men like that, they can't help falling back on their training. Makes them dangerous, but also vulnerable if you know what to look for." Lucas spread out a rough map drawn by Martha Henderson, showing the network of old mining tunnels that honeycombed the area. The Silver Creek mine connects to 3 smaller shafts that were abandoned when the ore played out. Martha's father was the mining engineer. She knows every tunnel and support beam. Michael's weathered face showed approval. "Raven, probably. Did basic surveys, secured the obvious entrances. But he won't know about connecting tunnels that aren't on official maps. These military types trust papers more than local knowledge." "There's more," Henderson added. "My brother worked those. Mine's before the war. The main shaft has a weakness. They hit an underground spring during drilling, had to shore it up, remove the right support beams. And the whole thing could flood," Lucas finished. "But we need to get the Miller boys out first." The sound, of approaching horses interrupted their planning. Through the trees, Lucas spotted Catherine Wheeler, daughter of the town's newspaper editor, riding hard toward their position. She reined up in a swirl of snow, her face flushed with urgency. "Ravens, men just rode into town," she reported quickly. "They're drinking at the saloon, boasting about how they're going to make an example of anyone who helps the Cole family. But that's not the worst part. I overheard Burke talking to the telegraph operator. They've sent for reinforcements. 20 more men are coming up from Helena." Lucas absorbed this information with tactical clarity. Raven was escalating, trying to gather overwhelming force before making his final move. But the gang leader's military thinking was also his weakness. He assumed superior numbers and position would guarantee victory. "How long until the reinforcements arrive?" Michael asked, his mind already adjusting their timetable. 2 days, maybe 3 with the snow. Catherine's expression showed her understanding of the situation's gravity. "My father wants to help. The newspaper office has a cellar with a tunnel that connects to the old church. We used it during the Indian raids last summer." Lucas studied the map again, seeing how Catherine's information changed their tactical options. The town's hidden tunnels, combined with the old mining shafts, created possibilities that Raven's military training wouldn't anticipate. "We need to move before those reinforcements arrive," Henderson observed, "but a direct assault on their position would be suicide." Michael Cole's thin smile held decades of tactical experience. "Who said anything about direct? You've got 3 things working in your favor: weather, terrain, and an enemy too confident to look beyond his military training." The old gunfighter began marking positions on the map, his mind working through possibilities that merged his son's knowledge of the gang with local resources Raven didn't know existed. The plan that emerged was anything but simple, frontal assault. "Martha's brother still runs the livery stable?" Michael asked. Lucas nodded. "He's been keeping track of which horses Raven's men favor. Says they're creatures of habit, always choose the same mounts, same tack." "Military training again," Michael noted. "Cavalrymen develop strong preferences about their horses. What else do we know about their habits?" Catherine spoke up. "They drink at McKinnon's saloon every 3rd night. Always sit with their backs to the wall, watch the front entrance, but they never pay attention to Mary McKinnon when she serves them. Her husband was killed in the war. They assume she's harmless." "And the Miller boys?" Lucas asked. "We need to know exactly where they're being held." "Secondary shaft, near the ore processing ruins," Henderson reported. 2 guards rotating shifts. They're careful, but they focus their attention outward. Don't really watch the old ventilation shafts." Lucas felt the familiar clarity of mind that came before decisive action. Raven's men were well-trained and numerous, but they suffered from the overconfidence that military experience often bred in men who'd turned to outlawry. They assumed their superior numbers, and tactical position made them invincible. What they didn't know was that every person they dismissed as harmless, the elderly rancher, the saloon owner's widow, the newspaperman's daughter, had been quietly observing their patterns, gathering intelligence that would turn their strengths into fatal weaknesses. Michael Cole checked his matched Colts with practiced efficiency. "First rule your grandfather taught me: a man's training can be used against him. Military men expect military tactics. Show them something different, and they react poorly," Lucas finished. He'd learned that lesson hunting outlaws in Dakota. Men with formal combat training often proved less adaptable than self-taught gunmen when faced with unconventional threats. The winter wind carried the promise of another storm as Lucas and his father refined their strategy. Raven's gang had numbers, position, and military discipline on their side, but they were about to learn why the Cole family's reputation had been built on more than just skill with a gun. Within hours, the operation would begin. Not with the frontal assault Raven's military mindset would expect, but with a carefully orchestrated series of deceptions designed to turn the gang's own training and assumptions against them. The quiet rancher and the legendary gunfighter would demonstrate why some reputations were built on more than just violence. They were built on the ability to make an enemy's greatest strengths become their fatal weakness. The afternoon sun cast long shadows through the swirling snow as Mary McKinnon moved silently through her saloon, serving drinks to Raven's men with practiced indifference. Her dull grey dress and timid demeanor were carefully calculated, making her invisible to the outlaws who'd taken over her establishment. None of them noticed how her seemingly random movements allowed her to catch fragments of their conversations, or how her trembling hands never quite matched her sharp, observant eyes. "Problem at the North Tunnel," one of Raven's lieutenants reported quietly. "Support beams showing stress. Morgan says we need to reinforce it before the next storm." The gang's leader drummed fingers on his silver-plated Remington. "Shift some. Men from the Miller Watch. Can't risk losing our main arsenal to a cave-in." Mary's hands remained steady as she cleared empty glasses, her mind recording every detail. The moment she entered the kitchen, her demeanor transformed. Catherine Wheeler waited by the back door, notebook ready. "They're moving men from the hostages to deal with tunnel repairs," Mary whispered, "and Raven's keeping his main weapons cache in the north shaft." Through the window, they spotted Lucas Cole's signal, a seemingly innocent farmer leading a horse to water. The operation's first phase was ready to begin. In the livery stable, Michael Cole worked with practiced efficiency, making subtle adjustments to the saddles favored by Raven's men. Not enough to be noticed during mounting, but the slight changes to stirrup length and girth tension would affect both horse and rider performance in crucial moments. "Feed's been doctored like you asked," Tom Henderson reported, entering the stable. "Not enough to sicken the horses, just make them restless. Mixed it with the herbs Martha provided." The old gunfighter nodded approval. During his years hunting outlaws, he'd learned that the smallest details often proved decisive. A horse responding a fraction slower than expected, a saddle shifting at the wrong moment. Such tiny disadvantages could multiply catastrophically in combat. At the Silver Greek mine, Raven's sentries maintained their professional vigilance, carefully watching the obvious approaches. None of them noticed the small group of local teenagers moving through the dense pine forest, placing Martha Henderson's special packages at precise intervals. The children of farmers and ranchers knew every game trail and hidden hollow, paths that Raven's military-trained men dismissed as tactically insignificant. "Charges are set," Sarah Miller reported through the old mine's ventilation shaft, her voice barely a whisper. The widow had insisted on participating in the operation to free her sons. Her knowledge of explosives, learned from her late husband's mining work, proved invaluable in preparing the distraction devices. Lucas Cole, concealed in the dense undergrowth, watched Raven's men through his spyglass. Their disciplined routine remained unbroken, but subtle signs of strain were appearing. The tunnel repairs forced them to adjust their carefully planned patrol schedules. Military training made them adapt by the book, predictably. "Rider coming," Billy Thompson whispered from his observation post. Through the swirling snow, a lone horseman approached the mine complex. Even at a distance, his expensive clothes and confident posture marked him as someone of importance. "Judge Harrison Blackwood," Catherine identified him from their concealed position. "He's been helping Raven acquire properties through legal means. My father's been gathering evidence of their corruption for months." Lucas studied the judge's interaction with Raven through his spyglass. The two men spoke briefly, their body language suggesting disagreement. The judge gestured emphatically toward the town, while Raven's posture grew increasingly rigid. "Your father's newspaper articles are making the judge nervous," Lucas observed. "He's trying to convince Raven to be more subtle." The gang leader's response was anything but subtle. He dispatched 6 riders toward town. Their purposeful movements suggesting violence rather than intimidation was now the priority. "They're going to burn the newspaper office," Catherine realized, her face paling. "Destroy my father's evidence." "No," Lucas corrected, noting the riders' weapons and formation. "They're going to make it look like an accident, probably the lamp oil store next door." Judge Blackwood wants deniability, but this development played into their strategy. Lucas gave the signal, 3 sharp bird calls. Along the road to town, Martha Henderson and her neighbors began implementing their part of the plan, the gang. Riders found their route complicated by a series of seemingly innocent obstacles. A broken-down wagon blocking the narrow pass, a small herd of sheep being moved between pastures, local women struggling with dropped purchases in the deep snow. Each delay was minor, but they multiplied, eating away precious minutes of daylight. Meanwhile, the modified feed began affecting the horses at the mine complex. The animals grew increasingly skittish, responding poorly to their riders' commands. Raven's men, trained to trust their military horsemanship, failed to recognize the pattern in their mounts' deteriorating behavior. Judge Blackwood's departure from the mine provided the opening they needed. The moment his expensive carriage disappeared into the swirling snow, Lucas gave the second signal. Sarah Miller's carefully placed charges detonated in sequence, creating a cascade of minor explosions that seemed to come from multiple directions. The effect on Raven's military-trained men was immediate and predictable. They responded exactly as their cavalry background dictated, mounting up to investigate the apparent attacks on their perimeter, splitting their forces to cover multiple approaches. But their horses, unsettled by the doctored feed and adjusted tack, proved less responsive than expected. Several riders struggled to maintain control as their mounts refused to follow commands. The disciplined response they drilled for dissolved into confusion. "They're dividing faster than expected," Michael observed from his position. "Raven's combat experience is working against him. He's responding to threats by the book, spreading his forces thin." The gang leader had positioned his men to defend against the kind of frontal assault his military training led him to expect. Instead, the seemingly random series of explosions and horse problems created an illusion of multiple threats, forcing him to commit resources in ways that isolated small groups of his men. In town, Mary McKinnon implemented the next phase. A seemingly accidental fire broke out in her saloon's storage room, small enough to be quickly contained, but large enough to draw attention. The 6 riders dispatched to destroy the newspaper office found themselves drafted into a bucket line by the town's women, their original mission delayed by social expectations they couldn't ignore without revealing their true purpose. "Raven's getting reports from multiple directions," Catherine noted, monitoring the signals from their network of observers. "His men can't maintain proper military formations with their horses acting up, and now the town emergency is pulling away his strike force." Lucas watched the gang leader through his spyglass, reading the frustration in his rigid posture. Raven's military experience had taught him to expect and counter conventional threats. The seemingly random series of equipment problems, minor explosions, and civilian complications didn't fit any tactical pattern he recognized. "He'll figure it out eventually," Michael warned. "Men like him, when their training fails them, they typically resort to overwhelming force. But by then, it would be too late." The first phase of their operation had achieved its primary goal, disrupting the gang's military discipline and forcing them to react to phantom threats. More importantly, it had confirmed their crucial weakness: rigid adherence to cavalry. Training that assumed enemies would behave according to predictable tactical doctrine. In the mine's secondary shaft, the 2 guards watching the Miller boys found their position increasingly difficult to maintain. The series of explosions demanded investigation, but their orders required maintaining prisoner security. By trying to satisfy both requirements, they compromised their effectiveness at either task. "They're getting sloppy," Sarah Miller observed, watching through a concealed opening in the old ventilation shaft. Her sons remained secure, but their guards' attention had shifted outward, focused on potential threats approaching along obvious routes. None of them noticed the small group of local teenagers who'd spent years playing in these mountains, moving through hidden paths that military training dismissed as unsuitable for tactical movement. Each apparent distraction had been carefully orchestrated to create opportunities that Raven's men, with their formal combat background, were trained to overlook. Through his spyglass, Lucas spotted something unexpected. A private coach approaching from the direction of Helena, moving fast despite the deteriorating weather. Catherine crept closer to their observation post, her expression tense. "That's Eleanor Blackwood, the judge's wife," she whispered. "She never comes to town unless it's important." The coach's arrival complicated their timeline. Eleanor Blackwood was known for her sharp mind and social connections. If she sensed something amiss, she might alert authorities who could interfere with their operation. A flash of movement caught Lucas's eye. One of Raven's sentries had abandoned his post, drawn by the series of distractions. The gap in their security coverage lasted only moments, but Martha Henderson's teenage son, Tommy, was already moving through it, swift and silent as a mountain cat. "The boy's got natural talent," Michael observed quietly. "Knows how to use terrain. Better than most trained scouts." Tommy's mission was crucial, placing Catherine's carefully forged documents where Eleanor Blackwood would find them. The papers suggested her husband's involvement with Raven went deeper than property manipulation, extending to darker crimes that would destroy his reputation in Helena's social circles. "Mrs. Blackwood's already suspicious," Catherine explained. "She's been asking questions about her husband's sudden wealth. These papers will confirm her fears, and a woman like that when she believes she's been betrayed." The strategy was delicate. Eleanor Blackwood's influence could either help or destroy their plans, depending on how she reacted to the evidence of her husband's corruption. Sarah Miller, watching from her concealed position near the mine entrance, signaled another development. 3 of Raven's men had discovered one of their doctored ammunition caches, cartridges carefully modified by Michael to misfire under specific conditions. "They're testing the rounds," she reported through their signal system, getting suspicious about their equipment problems, but even this played into their strategy. The more time Raven's men spent checking their weapons and gear, the less attention they paid to the teenagers moving through their blind spots, setting up the next phase of deceptions. The winter storm intensified as evening approached, reducing visibility and further complicating the gang's efforts to maintain military discipline. Nature itself seemed to conspire with their plans, the swirling snow making it impossible for Raven's sentries to maintain their carefully plotted fields of fire. Lucas gave the signal for the operation's second phase to begin. In the growing darkness, his father's lessons about turning an enemy's strength against them would prove more valuable than any amount of military training. The quiet rancher and the legendary gunfighter had laid the groundwork for a night that would remind the territory why some reputations were built on understanding rather than force, and why the most dangerous enemy wasn't the one who matched your strength, but the one who could turn your own certainties into vulnerabilities. Night wrapped the Blackfoot Valley in sheets of driving snow as Eleanor Blackwood's discovery of her husband's corruption triggered an unexpected chain of events. The judge's wife hadn't simply grown angry, she'd turned calculating, her social instincts transformed into weapons more precise than any gun. "She's summoned Caroline Preston," Catherine reported, returning from a brief reconnaissance of the town, "the territorial governor's sister." Lucas watched the interaction through his spyglass as the two socialites met in McKinnon's back parlor. Caroline Preston's presence complicated matters. She wielded significant influence over territorial appointments and banking regulations. Eleanor Blackwood wasted no time presenting the evidence of her husband's crimes, each document carefully selected to provoke specific responses. The governor's sister's face showed growing alarm as she realized how the corruption might taint her own family's political ambitions. "She's dispatched riders to Helena," Michael observed from his position near the livery stable. "Preston's trying to contain the scandal before it reaches the governor's office. But their political maneuvering created an unexpected opportunity. Raven's men, ordered to intercept any messengers leaving town, abandoned their carefully maintained patrol patterns. The resulting gaps in their security allowed Martha Henderson's network of local teenagers to move freely through their blind spots. Inside the mine complex, the Miller boys sensed the shift in their captors' attention. The guards, distracted by multiple runner sightings, failed to notice young James Miller working at his ropes with a small file, smuggled to him inside a hollowed-out biscuit during Sarah's earlier food delivery. Lucas caught his father's signal. 3 quick flashes from a shuttered lantern. The old gunfighter had finished his preparations in the northern tunnel system. The support beams, already weakened by natural erosion, now held packets of Martha's special compound, designed to dissolve the wood's structural integrity when exposed to moisture. "Raven's getting reports from his scouts," Sarah Miller whispered, appearing silently beside Lucas. "They've spotted Caroline Preston's riders, but can't identify all the messengers in this weather. He's ordered his men to detain anyone leaving the valley." The gang leader's response played perfectly into their strategy. His military training demanded controlling all access points, but the heavy snow made that impossible without splitting his forces even further. Judge Blackwood's arrived at the mine, Catherine reported through their signal system. "He looks furious. Eleanor must have sent him a message about the documents." Through the swirling snow, Lucas watched the confrontation unfold. The judge's normally composed demeanor had cracked, his wild gesturing suggesting panic rather than anger. Raven's response was cold, dismissive, a commander dealing with a liability rather than an ally. "Blackwood's breaking," Michael assessed, reading the body language. "Men like him, when their social position threatened, they'll sacrifice anyone to save themselves." The judge's next actions confirmed their prediction. He began writing frantically, producing documents that appeared to be signed confessions. But Lucas, watching through his spyglass, noted how the judge's eyes kept darting toward specific points around the mine complex. "He's trying to buy his own safety," Lucas realized, by revealing Raven's hidden assets and escape routes. This development created new possibilities. Sarah Miller's teenage messengers, moving through the storm like shadows, began collecting copies of the judge's hurried writings, each page adding to their understanding of the gang's resources. In town, Eleanor Blackwood proved more dangerous than anyone had anticipated. Her social connections had turned the respectable ladies of the community into an intelligence network more effective than any military scouts. Every movement of Raven's men was noted, every conversation overheard by seemingly innocent domestic staff. "Mrs. Preston's discovered the territorial bank connection," Catherine reported, returning from another reconnaissance. "Raven's been using Judge Blackwood's position to launder stolen money through legitimate business fronts." The revelation sparked a flurry of activity among the town's merchants, who began quietly withdrawing funds from suspected laundering operations. The resulting financial pressure forced Raven to dispatch more men to protect his monetary interests, further weakening his military positions. Inside the mine, James Miller had nearly worked through his ropes. His younger brother Thomas provided cover, deliberately aggravating an old cough to mask the sound of filing. Their guards, increasingly distracted by multiple developing crises, failed to notice the subtle signs of impending escape. Lucas caught movement at the mine entrance, Raven himself emerging to deal with the judge's deteriorating loyalty. The gang leader's military bearing had started showing cracks, his movements suggesting growing paranoia as more elements slipped. Beyond his control, he's losing his tactical advantage, Michael observed. Military training works against you when too many variables shift at once. Man starts seeing threats everywhere, can't trust his own judgment about which ones are real. The storm intensified as night deepened, but an unexpected sound cut through the wind, horses approaching from the north. Through his spyglass, Lucas identified the riders, 3 men wearing the distinctive badges of territorial marshals. Preston's influence, Catherine explained quickly. She's called in federal authority, trying to minimize scandal through official channels. But the marshal's arrival threatened to disrupt their carefully orchestrated operation. Law enforcement intervention now could prevent them from freeing the hostages while Raven's organization was vulnerable. Lucas's signals changed swiftly, adapting their strategy. Martha's network of teenagers began moving new packages into position, these containing evidence of Judge Blackwood's corruption rather than explosives. The marshals would find themselves drawn into investigating the town's prominent citizens rather than interfering with events at the mine. Eleanor Blackwood's offered her house for the marshals' headquarters, Sarah reported, her tone suggesting suppressed amusement. She's already arranged a dinner party, invited every corrupt businessman in the valley. The judge's wife had transformed her anger into a sophisticated weapon, using social obligations to trap her targets in rooms with federal investigators. Her manipulation of territorial politics was proving as effective as any military strategy. Michael Cole's thin smile showed appreciation for the unexpected ally. Sometimes the most dangerous predator isn't the one with the gun, it's the one who knows how to turn social power against itself. A signal from the mine's ventilation shaft indicated the Miller boys were nearly ready. Lucas began positioning their people for the next phase. Not just a rescue operation now, but a complex dance of political, social, and tactical elements that would dismantle Raven's organization at multiple levels. Through the driving snow, he caught glimpses of Martha's teenagers moving into their final positions. Each carried both weapons and documents, prepared to strike at either Raven's physical defenses or his carefully constructed social alibis. A new complication emerged as Reverend Morrison arrived at the mine complex. The elderly preacher's presence seemed innocent, merely checking on the spiritual welfare of the men, but Lucas, studying him through the spyglass, noted how the priest's wandering path took him past specific points of tactical significance. The Reverend's mapping their ammunition storage, Michael observed quietly. Notice how he stumbles near each cache. He's counting powder kegs. Morrison had served as a military chaplain during the war, his theological training masking a sharp, tactical mind. Now he moved among Raven's men, offering blessings and casual conversation, each exchange revealing crucial details about their supplies and morale. Meanwhile, the town's Chinese laundry owner, Mr. Chen, implemented his part of the plan. His network of workers, invisible to Raven's men who dismissed them as mere servants, began switching the gang's ammunition with carefully crafted duds during routine cleaning of their gear. Chen's people replaced half their cartridge boxes, Sarah reported. The real ammunition's been moved to Martha's root cellar. In town, Eleanor Blackwood's dinner party evolved into an orchestrated trap. Each course brought new revelations as Caroline Preston skillfully maneuvered corrupt officials into damaging admissions. The territorial marshals, positioned as serving staff, gathered evidence with every plate delivered. 3 bank directors have already implicated themselves, Catherine whispered, returning from her observation post. Preston's got them competing to turn evidence against each other. Lucas caught his father's signal. 4 quick flashes now. The old gunfighter had discovered something crucial in the northern tunnel. The support beams weren't just weakened. They showed signs of deliberate sabotage, predating their own operation. Raven's been planning to destroy the evidence all along, Lucas realized. Once he got control of the valley, he'd collapse the mine, burying any proof of his operation. This revelation changed the dynamics again. The gang leader wasn't just fighting to maintain control. He was racing against time to implement his own endgame before the competing pressures tore his organization apart. The storm's intensity worked in their favor now, masking the movement of Martha's teenagers as they repositioned to counter this new threat. Each carried small pouches of sawdust mixed with brick dust. When thrown, it would appear as tunnel collapse beginning, triggering Raven's men to implement evacuation protocols at precisely the wrong moment. The quiet rancher and the legendary gunfighter exchanged knowing looks. They'd created something unprecedented. A strategy where military strength, social power, and criminal enterprise collapsed inward, each element accelerating the destruction of the others. The next phase would demonstrate why the most dangerous enemy wasn't the one who confronted you directly, but the one who could turn your own plans into the mechanism of your defeat. The discovery of an unexpected telegraph message changed everything. Catherine Wheeler intercepted it at the town's telegraph office, a coded transmission that revealed Raven's true objective in the Blackfoot Valley. The gang leader wasn't just building a criminal empire, he was establishing a base for something far more ambitious. "It's an order for military-grade explosives," Catherine translated, her fingers tracing the coded symbols. "Enough to level half the mountain. Signed by someone calling themselves the Major." Lucas studied the decoded message, his tactical mind assembling new patterns. The Major, that's Colonel Victor Hayes. He was discharged from the 7th Cavalry for executing civilians. Disappeared. South of the border, with a cache of army weapons. Through the driving snow, fresh activity at the mine complex caught his attention. Raven's men were implementing new security measures, their movements suggesting preparations for receiving a significant shipment. "They're clearing the lower tunnel," Sarah Miller reported, emerging from her observation post near the ventilation shaft. "Moving the stolen cattle north ahead of schedule. Something spooked them." The reason became clear as a Native American scout named Two Hawks materialized from the storm. The man had once saved Michael Cole's life during the Dakota campaigns, and now served as their eyes along the northern smuggling routes. Army patrols, moving south from Fort Shaw, Two Hawks reported in his precise English. Looking for stolen military supplies, Hayes is using Raven's operation to stockpile weapons for a private army. This revelation transformed their understanding of the situation. Raven wasn't just another outlaw, he was Hayes's advance man, using cattle rustling and protection rackets to mask a military conspiracy. In town, Eleanor Blackwood's dinner party produced another crucial piece of intelligence. Her husband's private ledger, discovered by one of Mr. Chen's laundry workers, contained coded references to weapons shipments disguised as mining equipment. "The Territorial Bank's been laundering funds for Hayes's organization," Caroline Preston concluded, examining the documents. "They're using legitimate mining claims to cover the movement of military hardware." Lucas caught movement near the mine. Entrance, new riders arriving despite the storm. These men moved differently from Raven's usual soldiers, displaying a level of tactical awareness that spoke of extensive frontier combat experience. Apache Wars veterans, Michael identified them through his spyglass. Hayes is calling in specialists. He's not just building an army, he's recruiting men who know how to fight in rough countries. The situation demanded immediate adjustment of their strategy. Lucas signaled Martha's teenagers to modify their positions. The sawdust packets were redistributed, now targeting specific points that would appear as structural collapse, threatening the weapons cache. Inside the mine, James Miller had finally worked through his ropes, but instead of attempting to escape, the boy made a crucial discovery. The wall behind him contained a hidden chamber, revealed by the hollow sound of his careful tapping. "Storage space behind the south tunnel," Thomas Miller whispered through their signal system. "We can hear them moving heavy crates, metal contents based on the sound." Reverend Morrison, continuing his apparently innocent visits to the mine, provided confirmation. His keen military eye had spotted gun oil stains near the hidden chamber's concealed entrance. The arrival of the territorial marshals added another layer of complexity. These weren't just ordinary lawmen. Lucas recognized two of them as former Pinkerton agents who'd worked with his father years ago. "They're here for Hayes, not Raven," Michael deduced, noting their professional interest in the weapons intelligence. The governor's office must have connected the weapons thefts to the terminated colonel. Eleanor Blackwood proved invaluable once again. Her dinner party had evolved into an informal command center where seemingly innocent social gossip masked the coordination of multiple investigative threads. "The bank directors are cracking," Catherine reported after another reconnaissance. "Preston convinced them Hayes's organization plans to eliminate local witnesses once the weapons are moved. This created a new opportunity. Fear of Hayes's reputation for brutality was turning Raven's institutional support against him. Local businessmen, initially content to profit from the gang's operations, now saw themselves as potential victims. Lucas spotted Judge Blackwood making another trip to the mine, his manner suggesting increasing desperation. The man's attempt to save himself by betraying Raven had backfired. He'd implicated himself too deeply in Hayes's larger conspiracy. "He's offering them new escape routes," Two Hawks observed from his concealed position. "But he's really showing us their fallback positions." The storm's intensity worked to their advantage in unexpected ways. The heavy snow forced Raven's men to continuously clear paths to their sentry positions, the physical labor wearing down their military discipline. More importantly, it provided cover for Mr. Chen's people to continue switching their ammunition with carefully crafted duds. "Hayes's specialists are taking control of the operation," Sarah reported, returning from another observation circuit. "They're implementing frontier warfare protocols, Apache-style security measures. But this actually created new vulnerabilities. The specialists' experience with tribal warfare made them focus on defending against the tactics they knew, guerrilla attacks and direct assaults. They weren't prepared for the multi-layered strategy Lucas and his father had crafted." Martha. Henderson's network expanded its operation, now including the wives and daughters of local ranchers. These women moved freely through the storm, their domestic errands masking the movement of intelligence and supplies. They carried baskets of fresh bread to homebound neighbors, each delivery containing coded updates on enemy positions. Inside the mine, the Miller boys made another discovery. The hidden chamber contained more than weapons. They found maps showing Hayes's ultimate objective. The former colonel wasn't just building a private army. He was planning to establish a permanent base of operations in the territory. "The geological surveys are falsified," James Miller transmitted through their signal system. "They're going to use the mine's alleged collapse to cover the construction of an underground fortress." This information changed the operational dynamics. Again, Hayes's involvement elevated their local struggle into something with territorial implications. If his plan succeeded, the Blackfoot Valley would become a staging ground for military raids across the frontier. Lucas caught his father's signal. 5 quick flashes now. The old gunfighter had finished positioning their own surprises in the tunnel system. Each cache of sawdust and brick dust was placed to trigger specific responses, turning the enemy's military expertise into a weapon against them. Through the swirling snow, more riders approached from the north. But these weren't Hayes's men. Two Hawks identified them as Army scouts, moving ahead of the main patrol from Fort Shaw. Among the military supplies, the Miller boys discovered something even more alarming: detailed profiles of prominent territorial officials, including their families, daily routines, and vulnerabilities. These weren't just intelligence files, they were targeting packages. Hayes is planning a coordinated strike, Lucas realized, studying the decoded information. Once his weapons are in place, he'll eliminate the territory's entire leadership structure in a single night. The implications spread beyond mere criminality. Such an operation would throw the territory into chaos, creating a power vacuum that Hayes's private army could exploit. His military background wasn't just training, it was the blueprint for a coup. Two Hawks detected another significant development. The Apache war veterans weren't just providing security, they were training Raven's men in advanced frontier warfare techniques. The mine complex was being transformed into a combat school. They're learning shadow walking, Two Hawks reported, his tone carrying professional concern. Night fighting methods my people developed, skills that make men dangerous in ways guns cannot match. This new threat required immediate adaptation. Lucas signaled Martha's teenagers to adjust their movements, implementing counter techniques that Two Hawks had taught him years ago. Each young scout now moved, using methods specifically designed to counter Apache warfare tactics. Meanwhile, Caroline Preston made a crucial discovery through her social network. The territorial bank's involvement went beyond money laundering. They were actively recruiting disgruntled Army veterans, offering them shares in Hayes's planned empire. "It's a shadow army," Preston explained during a private moment at Eleanor's dinner party. "Every discharged soldier, every bitter veteran, with combat experience. They're building a force of men who feel betrayed by the government they once served." The arrival of Army scouts added another layer of complexity. Through his spyglass, Lucas recognized their leader, Lieutenant Thomas Hawkins, whose sister had been among the civilians Hayes executed. The young officer's presence wasn't just professional, it was personal. Sarah Miller, observing from her hidden position, caught snippets of conversation between Raven's new specialists. Their training included more than combat techniques. They were learning to move through civilized society undetected, blending into town life while maintaining their deadly capabilities. "They're creating sleeper agents," Michael assessed grimly. "Men who can live among regular folks, seem perfectly normal until Hayes gives the signal." The quiet rancher and the legendary gunfighter exchanged knowing looks. They'd uncovered something far more dangerous than a simple criminal enterprise. This was an organized attempt to subvert and replace the entire power structure of the frontier. The next phase would require more than tactical brilliance. It would demand the complete dismantling of Hayes's carefully constructed shadow organization. Lieutenant Hawkins's advanced scouts triggered an unexpected chain of events. Their presence forced Hayes's veterans to implement emergency protocols, revealing aspects of their operation that would have otherwise remained hidden. Behind the mine's tool shed, they uncovered a concealed telegraph station, its sophisticated encryption equipment suggesting connections far beyond the territory. British-made Wheatstone devices. Catherine identified the equipment. Military grade, not available to civilians. Someone's been coordinating with foreign interests. Lucas studied the coded messages they'd intercepted. The patterns suggested something more organized than mere weapons smuggling. Hayes wasn't just building a private army. He was establishing a network that extended across international borders. "They're corresponding with former Confederate officers in Mexico," Michael noted, his weathered fingers tracing the decoded text, "planning coordinated operations along the entire frontier." Two Hawks brought more disturbing news. His reconnaissance had discovered supply caches hidden throughout the territory, each positioned to support rapid military movement. The weapons they'd found weren't just for local control. They were meant to arm a full-scale uprising. Cache markers use Confederate cavalry signs, the scout reported. Modified to include Mexican military symbols, they're building a coalition. Sarah Miller, monitoring the mine's hidden chamber through carefully drilled observation holes, noted increased activity among Hayes's specialists. They were conducting training sessions using maps of government installations, teaching ravens, men infiltration techniques developed during the war. These aren't just combat drills, she whispered through their signal system. They're preparing for specific targets, territorial capitals, federal arsenals, railroad junctions. The situation gained another dimension when Eleanor Blackwood made a crucial discovery during her dinner party. Among her husband's papers, she found correspondence with European arms merchants, arranging shipments through seemingly legitimate mining companies. The banking network extends to London and Paris, Caroline Preston confirmed, examining the documents. They're using international mining investments to mask weapons purchases. Lucas caught movement at the mine entrance, a group of Hayes's men preparing for a night operation. Their equipment wasn't standard military issue. Through his spyglass, he identified specialized climbing gear and underwater breathing apparatus. Of foreign manufacture, British Royal Engineers design, Lieutenant Hawkins confirmed when consulted. Same equipment used for covert harbor operations. They're planning something involving water access. The pieces began forming a larger pattern. The mine's location, the underwater gear, the international connections. Hayes wasn't just planning territorial conquest. He was establishing infrastructure for a sustained campaign that would affect national security. Martha Henderson's network of observers reported new developments in town. Strange equipment was being delivered to seemingly innocent businesses, printing presses capable of producing official documents, specialized inks used in government securities. They're setting up to forge territorial bonds and land grants, Catherine explained, creating paper trails to legitimize their eventual takeover. Inside the mine, James Miller made another significant discovery. The hidden chamber contained more than weapons and maps. He found detailed dossiers on military commanders across the frontier, including psychological profiles and potential leverage points. They're planning to suborn key officers, Michael assessed, reviewing the intelligence, turn them using combinations of blackmail and ideology. Hayes is building a shadow command structure inside the regular army. Reverend Morrison's continued. Reconnaissance yielded crucial details about the operation's timeline. During his pastoral visits, he noted supply requisitions and personnel rotations that suggested Hayes planned to initiate his campaign within weeks. They're synchronizing with events in Mexico, Two Hawks added, connecting multiple intelligence threads, waiting for political instability that will divide federal military response. The arrival of Army scouts had another unexpected effect. Their presence forced Hayes's specialists to modify their training program, revealing methods that exposed their true capabilities. These weren't just disgruntled veterans, they were professional insurgents with international backing. Lucas spotted a new group approaching the mine, civilians riding quality horses, their clothing and manner suggesting Eastern education. Through his spyglass, he identified several as representatives of prominent banking families. Financial inspection, Catherine interpreted after consulting Preston's intelligence network. Hayes's European backers want verification before releasing additional funds. The bankers' arrival created an opportunity. Their presence required Hayes's men to maintain appearances of legitimate mining operations, disrupting their normal security protocols. This opened gaps that Martha's teenagers could exploit. Mr. Chen's network discovered another layer of the conspiracy. The laundry workers found specialized survey equipment hidden among regular mining tools, devices designed to map underground spaces with military precision. They're not just using the mine as a base, Lucas realized. They're creating an entire underground infrastructure, Every shaft and tunnel is being prepared for long-term military occupation. The storm's intensity finally began to slacken, but this brought new complications. Clear weather would allow Hayes's operation to accelerate their timeline. Already, Lucas could spot increased activity, suggesting preparation for major shipment. Arrivals. Sarah Miller, watching from her observation post, noted how the Apache veterans were teaching Raven's men to exploit civilian infrastructure. Every delivery route, every regular business transaction was being evaluated for its potential as a covert supply line. They're building their organization into the territory's daily life, she reported, making it impossible to separate legitimate commerce from their military supply chain. Lieutenant Hawkins's scouts brought reports of similar activities throughout the region. Hayes's network had spread further than anyone realized, establishing cells that could coordinate across vast distances without direct communication. Lucas caught his father's signal, 6 rapid flashes in a new pattern. The old gunfighter had discovered something in the northern tunnel system that changed everything. The support beams weren't just rigged for demolition, they were part of a larger engineering project. Through the clearing weather, more riders approached from multiple directions. Their varied appearance and seemingly random arrival patterns suggested casual civilian traffic, but Lucas recognized the underlying military precision in their movements. In the town's supposedly abandoned gristmill, Catherine discovered another dimension of Hayes's operation. Hidden beneath grain sacks and farming equipment lay a sophisticated photographic studio, complete with specialized cameras and chemical development facilities. They're not just forging documents, she realized, examining the equipment. They're creating entire false identities, military records, citizenship papers, territorial appointments. The scope of the deception became clear when 2 hawks found discarded photographic plates in a nearby creek. The images showed Hayes's men in various official uniforms, staged to appear as legitimate government representatives. Each operative has multiple cover identities, Lieutenant Hawkins confirmed, his military training helping decode the system. They can pose as cavalry officers one day, territorial officials the next. Sarah Miller noticed something else while observing the mine's activities. The Apache veterans weren't just teaching combat techniques, they were instructing Raven's men in an intricate sign language, allowing silent communication across vast distances. They've modified traditional tribal signals, 2 hawks explained, watching through his spyglass, combined them with military hand codes, created something new that only their people understand. Eleanor Blackwood's dinner party produced another crucial revelation. Among the banking documents, Preston found evidence of an elaborate insurance fraud scheme. Hayes's organization was deliberately burning homesteads, then collecting payments through front companies. They're not just stealing resources, Lucas concluded. They're using legitimate business practices to finance their operation. Every accident generates capital for weapons purchases. Martha's teenage observers reported new activity at the town's railway station. Ordinary supply shipments now carried subtle marks, seemingly random damage that actually conveyed coded information about contents and destinations. The quiet rancher and the legendary gunfighter had uncovered a conspiracy that transformed every aspect of frontier life into potential military infrastructure. Hayes wasn't just building an army, he was creating an invisible empire that could operate in plain sight. As midnight approached, Lucas Cole initiated the first phase of their counter-operation. Mr. Chen's workers began releasing carefully treated smoke into the mine's ventilation system. Not enough to cause alarm, but sufficient to make Hayes's men believe their hidden chamber had developed natural gas leaks. The Apache veterans are getting suspicious, Sarah Miller reported through their signal network. They recognize something's wrong, but can't identify what. The psychological effect was immediate. Hayes's specialists, trained to trust their Combat instincts began second-guessing their own security measures. The apparent environmental threat forced them to adjust their carefully planned rotations. Lieutenant Hawkins's scouts exploited this disruption, moving key pieces of evidence out through Martha's teenage network. Each document was photographed by Catherine using the conspirators' own equipment before being replaced with subtly altered copies. "They won't notice the changes immediately," Catherine explained, developing the plates in the abandoned gristmill. "But when Hayes reviews their reports, the inconsistencies will force him to question his own organization's competence." In town, Eleanor Blackwood's dinner party entered a new phase. Caroline Preston orchestrated a seemingly innocent card game that forced corrupt officials to maintain multiple false stories simultaneously. The mental strain of keeping their lies straight began showing in subtle tells. "The bank director's breaking," Preston whispered, noting the man's increasingly erratic behavior. "He's realizing Hayes's operation has compiled enough evidence to destroy him, regardless of outcome." Two hawks brought word of unexpected movement along the northern smuggling routes. Hayes's European contacts had dispatched their own observers. Professional intelligence agents masquerading as mining investors, Belgian military attachés. Michael identified them through his spyglass. Same ones who evaluated Confederate artillery during the war. They're here to assess Hayes's operation. For potential foreign backing, this development created new opportunities. Lucas signaled Martha's teenagers to modify their positions, ensuring the foreign agents observed carefully staged scenes of organizational dysfunction. Each incident appeared random, but contributed to an impression of operational instability. Inside the mine, James Miller implemented the next phase of their strategy. His apparent escape attempt was actually a calculated move to force Hayes's men into revealing their emergency protocols. "They're using Confederate cavalry response patterns," Lieutenant Hawkins noted, watching through his field glasses. "But modified with Mexican army elements. Shows us exactly who's involved in training them." The storm's clearing brought another advantage. Two Hawks' network of tribal scouts began moving into position along the high ridges, using traditional hunting signals to coordinate their movements. Hayes's Apache veterans, spotting these signs, would assume hostile tribal activity threatened their operation. Sarah Miller noticed something crucial during this confusion. The specialist's reactions revealed a complex system of authority, multiple chains of command that suggested Hayes's organization wasn't as unified as it appeared. "The former cavalry officers and Apache veterans have different priorities," she reported. "They're following separate protocols, creating gaps in their security." Lucas caught movement at the mine entrance, Raven himself emerging to deal with the mounting complications. The gang leader's interaction with his specialists showed increasing strain. Military discipline was breaking down as different factions pursued conflicting objectives. Catherine's observation of the telegraph office yielded another vital insight. The encrypted messages showed growing distrust between Hayes's American and European connections. Each group was beginning to question the other's reliability. Through the gristmill's window, Lucas spotted new arrivals at the hotel. Civilian-dressed men whose careful positioning suggested military training. But their movements revealed crucial details about their background. Pinkerton agents, Michael identified them. The railway companies must have realized Hayes's plan threatens their interests. They've sent their own investigators. This added another layer of complexity. The Pinkertons would pursue their own agenda, potentially disrupting both Hayes's operation and Lucas's carefully laid plans. But their presence also created opportunities for misdirection. Martha Henderson's network adapted swiftly. Her teenagers began feeding selected information to the Pinkerton agents, carefully crafted to accelerate the growing discord within Hayes's organization. The railway companies can't risk Hayes controlling Key transportation routes, Catherine explained after consulting Preston's intelligence. They'll move against him regardless of the government response. Lucas spotted more activity near the mine's secondary entrance. Hayes's specialists were implementing new security measures, but their haste revealed crucial weaknesses. Each group followed its own tactical doctrine, creating overlapping but incompatible defensive patterns. Sarah Miller's position near the ventilation shaft allowed her to observe the resulting confusion. The Apache veterans recognized the flaws in the cavalry officers' plans, but maintained their silence, letting their rivals' mistakes compound. They're protecting their own interests now. Two hawks interpreted their behavior, preparing for the organization's eventual collapse. Lieutenant Hawkins's scouts reported similar dynamics throughout Hayes's network. Different factions were quietly establishing independent supply lines and escape routes, preparing for potential betrayal. Mr. Chen's network discovered another crucial detail during their infiltration. The laundry workers found distinctive chalk marks on the specialists' boot heels, different colors indicating separate command structures within Hayes's organization. The marks correspond to specific European military academies, Lieutenant Hawkins explained, examining the evidence. Each group trained under different tactical doctrines. They're maintaining old loyalties. This revelation provided new opportunities. Lucas adjusted their strategy to exploit these divided loyalties. Martha's teenagers began leaving false chalk marks in strategic locations, creating uncertainty about which specialists controlled specific areas. Eleanor Blackwood's dinner party produced unexpected intelligence when the bank director's wife, loosened by wine and anxiety, revealed a separate set of financial records hidden in her husband's hunting lodge. Hayes doesn't just have one operation, Caroline Preston realized, examining the documents. He's running multiple parallel organizations, each unaware of the others. They're all competing for the same resources. In the mine's lower levels, Sarah Miller noticed the Apache veterans implementing their own subtle sabotage. They were deliberately miscommunicating cavalry signals, creating confusion that only they understood. They're positioning themselves to take control when Hayes's command structure fails, Two Hawks interpreted, using the organization's complexity against itself. The Pinkerton agents added another layer to the growing chaos. Their presence forced Hayes's specialists to maintain multiple covers simultaneously, straining their ability to coordinate effectively. The quiet rancher and the legendary gunfighter had initiated a cascade of doubt and suspicion that would transform Hayes's greatest strength, his diverse coalition of experts, into a critical vulnerability. Each specialist's attempt to protect their own interests now served to undermine the entire operation. Dawn brought an unexpected complication. A private train arriving at the station, its luxury car bearing diplomatic markings. Catherine Wheeler, observing from the telegraph office, identified the new arrival through her father's international contacts. Baron Victor Kruger, she reported, Austrian military attaché, supposedly here to evaluate mining investments. His real specialty is organizing mercenary operations in disputed territories. Lucas studied the Baron's entourage through his spyglass. Their civilian attire couldn't hide the precision of their movements. These were professional soldiers, masquerading as business representatives. The Baron's presence changes everything, Michael assessed. He's not just an observer. During the war, he specialized in establishing shadow governments in occupied regions. Through their network of observers, they learned that Kruger's arrival had triggered immediate changes in Hayes's operation. The European-trained specialists began implementing new protocols, different from both the Confederate and Apache systems. They're shifting to Austrian military doctrine, Lieutenant Hawkins explained, recognizing the patterns. Urban warfare techniques developed during the Hungarian uprising, designed for taking control of civilian infrastructure. Sarah Miller, watching from her observation post, noticed how this new development affected the mine's internal dynamics. The Apache veterans particularly resented the European interference, seeing it as a threat to their authority. They're deliberately misinterpreting Kruger's orders, Two Hawks reported, making small mistakes that look accidental but systematically undermine his control systems. In town, Eleanor Blackwood's dinner party gained another player. The Baron's social secretary, a sharp-eyed woman named Magdalena Kraft, arrived bearing letters of introduction from European banking houses. "She's more than a secretary," Caroline Preston warned after observing her interactions. "Her questions about local property titles are too precise. She's mapping ownership patterns, identifying key control points." The situation gained another dimension when Mr. Chen's workers discovered specialized surveying equipment in the Baron's private car. The instruments weren't for mining. They were military-grade tools for plotting artillery positions. Kruger's planning something larger, Lucas realized, examining the evidence. Hayes's operation isn't just about territorial control. They're establishing forward bases for foreign military intervention. Martha Henderson's network reported new activity. Around the mine's peripheral buildings, the European specialists were conducting detailed inspections of local water sources, paying particular attention to reservoir access points. They're following the Danube campaign playbook. Lieutenant Hawkins identified the strategy. Control. The water controlled the population, same tactics used to pacify Hungarian resistance. James Miller, still maintaining his cover as a captive, overheard crucial conversations between Kruger's men. Their German discussions, which they assumed no one understood, revealed plans to establish a network of fortified positions throughout the territory. Each mining operation will become a military strongpoint, Catherine translated the intelligence. Connected by telegraph lines and hidden supply routes, they're building occupation infrastructure. The Baron's presence attracted additional attention. 2 more private trains arrived, carrying representatives from other European military powers. Each group brought their own specialists and competing agendas. French military engineers, Michael identified one group. Italian logistics experts. They're all trying to establish their own influence over Hayes's operation. This international involvement created new opportunities. Lucas adjusted their strategy to exploit the Europeans' competing interests. Martha's teenagers began planting evidence suggesting each group was secretly working against the others. Sarah Miller noticed the effect on Hayes's original specialists. The Confederate veterans particularly resented foreign interference in what they saw as a purely American operation. Their resistance took subtle forms, small delays, misinterpreted. Orders equipment mysteriously malfunctioning. The organization's starting to fracture along national lines, Two Hawks observed, each group trying to protect their own interests, suspicious of the other's motives. Eleanor Blackwood's dinner party became an unofficial diplomatic reception, as the Europeans attempted to maintain their cover as legitimate investors. The resulting social dynamics revealed crucial intelligence. They're competing for control of specific resources, Preston reported after observing their interactions. Each nation wants exclusive access to different aspects of Hayes's network. The Pinkerton agents added another layer of complexity. Their presence forced the Europeans to maintain elaborate civilian covers while simultaneously implementing military preparations. The strain of this dual deception created exploitable weaknesses. Lucas spotted increased activity around the mine's main entrance. Kruger's men were implementing new security measures, but their European military precision clashed with the Apache veterans' more fluid defensive style. They're creating blind spots, Lieutenant Hawkins noted. Each group's tactics undermine the other's effectiveness. Perfect for our purposes. Mr. Chen's network discovered another significant detail. The European specialists used different quality standards for their equipment, creating compatibility issues that further strained Hayes's organizational structure. Their ammunition doesn't match Confederate weapons, Michael explained. Their communication protocols conflict with existing systems. Every improvement they attempt actually increases operational friction. Through the early morning light, Lucas could see the first signs of their strategy's success. Hayes's carefully constructed operation was becoming its own worst enemy. Each specialist's expertise, each nation's agenda, served to complicate rather than enhance their capabilities. Magdalena Kraft's presence revealed another dimension of European involvement. During the dinner party, she received a coded message that visibly disturbed her careful composure. "Vienna has its own agenda," Catherine translated from her position near the telegraph office. "The Austrians aren't just supporting Hayes. They're planning to use his operation to establish their own colonial foothold in the territory." This revelation sparked immediate reactions among the other European factions. The French engineers began modifying their construction plans subtly, altering key defensive positions to protect against their supposed allies. "They're building fallback positions," Lieutenant Hawkins noted, studying the revised blueprints. "Each nation's specialists are preparing for eventual conflict with the others." Two Hawks discovered evidence of even deeper division. The European surveying teams were secretly mapping different escape routes, each group planning for the possibility of sudden betrayal. "The Italians are caching supplies along the southern trails," he reported. "The French are establishing safe houses in town. No group trusts the others to maintain the alliance." In the mine's lower levels, James Miller noticed how these tensions affected the guard rotations. Each national group insisted on posting their own sentries, creating a fragmented security system with obvious vulnerabilities. "The Apache veterans are exploiting these gaps," Sarah Miller observed from her position, "using the Europeans' rigid protocols against them, creating blind spots only they can navigate." The Baron's presence had another unexpected effect. His formal military bearing and aristocratic manner offended the Confederate veterans' democratic sensibilities, creating subtle but significant resistance to his authority. The quiet rancher and the legendary gunfighter had achieved something remarkable, transforming Hayes's international coalition into a complex web of competing interests that would inevitably destroy itself from within. Each group's attempt to gain advantage over the others served only to weaken the entire operation. The breaking dawn brought a new element to the unfolding drama, the arrival of a nondescript freight wagon whose cargo changed everything. Through his spyglass, Lucas spotted the distinctive markings of the Smithsonian Institution, partially visible beneath the wagon's canvas cover. "Scientific equipment," Catherine identified after consulting her father's contacts. "The Smithsonian's mounting an archaeological expedition to study native ruins in the territory." But Lieutenant Hawkins recognized something else about the wagon's occupants. Those aren't just scientists. The leaders bearing the way they handle their equipment, their army intelligence agents using academic cover. The presence of federal investigators added an unexpected dimension to their strategy. The army agents' careful documentation of Hayes's operation would provide official evidence that even his European backers couldn't dismiss. Inside the mine, James Miller noticed immediate changes in the specialist's behavior. The archaeological expedition forced them to maintain their mining operation facade while simultaneously hiding military preparations, a dual deception that strained their resources. "They're making mistakes," Sarah Miller reported from her observation post. "The Apache veterans see it too. They're deliberately stepping back, letting the Europeans fumble their response." Two Hawks brought intelligence from his network of tribal scouts. The Smithsonian's arrival had attracted attention from unexpected quarters. Representatives from several native nations were gathering to monitor the situation. The tribes understand what's really happening, he explained. They've seen this pattern before, foreign powers using archaeological studies to mask military reconnaissance. In town, Eleanor Blackwood's dinner party gained another layer of complexity as the expedition's nominal leader, Professor Harrison Wright, requested accommodations. His scholarly demeanor concealed sharp observations of the European specialists' activities. He's cataloguing their movements, Caroline Preston noted after watching his careful note-taking. Every conversation, every interaction, he's building a comprehensive intelligence file. Baron Kruger's reaction to the Smithsonian's presence revealed crucial weaknesses in the European operation. His attempts to maintain diplomatic courtesy while restricting access to key areas created obvious patterns of suspicious behavior. Martha Henderson's network adapted swiftly to this new dynamic. Her teenagers began positioning native artifacts at strategic locations, forcing the Europeans to either allow archaeological investigation or reveal their military priorities. Each artifact becomes a test, Michael observed, watching the specialists' reactions. They have to choose between maintaining their cover and protecting sensitive areas. Lucas spotted increased activity around the mine's peripheral buildings. The European engineers were hastily modifying their fortifications to appear as legitimate mining structures, but their rushed work exposed telling details about their true purpose. They're compromising their own defensive positions, Lieutenant Hawkins explained, trading tactical advantage for plausible deniability. The Smithsonian's presence affected Hayes's operation in another crucial way. Professor Wright's scholarly interest in local geology forced the mining operation to produce authentic technical data, information that revealed the implausibility of their legitimate business claims. Their production reports don't match the mineral surveys, Catherine decoded. They're having to fabricate increasingly complex explanations for simple questions. Mr. Chen's network discovered something significant. During this confusion, the European specialists had begun destroying certain documents rather than risk their discovery by the archaeological team. They're erasing their own operational history, Lucas realized. Each group desperately trying to hide evidence of their true purpose. Sarah Miller noticed how this document destruction created new tensions. Different factions within Hayes's organization valued different records. What one group saw as dangerous evidence, another considered crucial intelligence. The Confederate veterans are particularly angry, she reported. The Europeans are burning papers they need for their supply coordination. Professor Wright's archaeological methods proved surprisingly effective at undermining Hayes's security. His insistence on methodical site documentation forced the specialists to either restrict access to suspicious areas or allow detailed examination of their activities. He's mapping their entire operation, Lieutenant Hawkins noted with professional appreciation, not through direct investigation but by carefully noting which areas they protect most intensely. The arrival of native observers added another layer of pressure. Their presence required Hayes's men to maintain multiple facades, appearing as legitimate miners to the Smithsonian team while hiding their military nature from tribal scouts, who knew the territory intimately. Through their signal network, James Miller reported increasing strain among the guard forces. The competing demands of security and secrecy created impossible situations. Each solution to one problem inevitably exposed vulnerabilities in other areas. Baron Kruger's attempt to manage these complications revealed the fundamental weakness in Hayes' coalition. Each specialist group interpreted the situation through their own military doctrine, implementing solutions that conflicted with their allies' methods. "They're actually helping us now," Michael observed, as another rushed. Reorganization created new gaps in their security. Every attempt to fix one problem makes three others worse. The quiet rancher and the legendary gunfighter had achieved something remarkable, transforming legitimate archaeological research into a weapon that forced Hayes's organization to destroy itself. The very effort to maintain their cover story was systematically exposing their true nature. Through the morning light, Lucas could see their strategy's effectiveness in every hasty adjustment, every compromised position, every destroyed document. Hayes's operation was unraveling not through direct confrontation, but through the impossible demands of maintaining too many deceptions simultaneously. The presence of Professor Wright's team created another unexpected advantage. The European specialists, accustomed to controlling information through military authority, found themselves unable to dismiss or intimidate civilian academics backed by federal institutions. They're trapped by their own pretense, Catherine noted after observing another awkward interaction. They can't prevent the investigation without revealing exactly what they're trying to hide. Two Hawks reported increasing activity among the tribal observers. The native scouts recognized the Europeans' discomfort with archaeological oversight as a sign of deeper deceptions. The tribes are sharing information now, he explained. Each nation contributing their observations, building a complete picture of Hayes's true operation. Professor Wright's archaeological methods brought another unexpected advantage. His team included a young photographer, Edward Holbrook, whose insistence on documenting every aspect of the site created insurmountable problems for Hayes's operation. Holbrook's camera catches details human observers might miss, Lieutenant Hawkins noted, watching the photographer work. The Europeans can't control what his plates might reveal. The photographic documentation forced Hayes's specialists to maintain their deceptions even during casual moments. Every image risked capturing, telling details, military postures, concealed weapons, defensive positions carefully disguised as mining operations. They're exhausting themselves, Sarah Miller reported, observing the strain, having to check every angle, every background, every accidental reflection that might appear in Holbrook's photographs. Catherine discovered another dimension to the archaeological team's effectiveness. Professor Wright's female assistant, Dr. Margaret Foster, possessed expertise in comparative architecture that proved devastating to the Europeans' cover story. She's identifying military engineering principles in their construction, Catherine explained after reviewing Foster's notes, pointing out how their supposedly practical mining modifications match fortification techniques from specific European military academies. The scientific team's presence affected Hayes's operation in another crucial way. Their careful cataloguing of local geology revealed inconsistencies in the mine's official production records. The mineral deposits don't match their shipping manifests, James Miller reported through their signal system. Professor Wright's surveys are exposing years of falsified mining data. Two Hawks brought word of new developments among the tribal observers. The native nations had begun sharing their own historical records with the Smithsonian team, using archaeological interest to disguise strategic intelligence gathering. Each tribe contributes pieces of the puzzle, he explained. Stories about water sources, hidden caves, seasonal paths, information that reveals the military significance of Hayes's chosen positions. Mr. Chen's network discovered something significant during this period of confusion. The European specialists had begun arguing over which documents to destroy, revealing critical details about their operation's structure. Each group has different priorities, Lucas noted, studying the pattern of their document disposal. What the Austrians consider crucial intelligence, the French see as dangerous evidence. The archaeological team's methodical approach created another unexpected advantage. Their insistence on grid-based site mapping forced Hayes's men to either restrict access to suspicious areas or allow detailed documentation of their activities. Wright's survey methods are military grade, Lieutenant Hawkins observed. He's using archaeological principles to create precise tactical maps of their entire operation. Baron Kruger's attempts to manage these complications revealed deeper fractures in Hayes's coalition. The European specialists found themselves torn between maintaining their cover and protecting operational security. They're compromising both, Michael assessed, watching another hasty reorganization create new vulnerabilities. Every effort to appear legitimate to the scientists makes their military nature more obvious to experienced observers. The presence of Dr. Foster proved particularly problematic for Hayes's operation. Her architectural expertise allowed her to recognize specific national influences in their construction techniques. These support beam arrangements are distinctly Austrian, she noted during one inspection, while the ventilation system shows French military engineering principles, fascinating mix of European mining traditions. The quiet rancher and the legendary gunfighter had achieved something remarkable, transforming scientific methodology into a weapon that systematically exposed a military conspiracy. The very thoroughness that made archaeological investigation effective also made it impossible for Hayes's operation to maintain its deceptions. Through the morning light, Lucas could see their strategy's success in every forced adjustment, every compromised position, every revealing photograph. The effort to appear legitimate to academic scrutiny was destroying Hayes's organization more effectively than any direct confrontation. The tribal observers added another layer of pressure, using traditional knowledge to enhance the archaeological investigation. Their intimate understanding of the landscape helped Professor Wright's team identify unnatural modifications that betrayed military purpose. The Europeans can't hide their true intentions from people who've lived here for generations, Two Hawks explained. Every change they've made to the land tells a story about their real plans. Sarah Miller noticed how these revelations affected the Apache veterans. Their pride in native knowledge made them increasingly resentful of European attempts to dismiss tribal observations as primitive superstition. The morning sun climbed higher as Hayes's carefully constructed organization continued its inevitable disintegration. Each group's desperate attempt to protect its own interests while maintaining multiple false fronts only accelerated the collapse. Lucas caught his father's signal, a new pattern indicating it was time for the next phase. They had created something unprecedented, a strategy that used legitimate scientific inquiry to force a military conspiracy to expose itself. The quiet rancher and the legendary gunfighter had demonstrated why the most dangerous enemy wasn't the one who attacked directly, but the one who could turn an organization's own need for secrecy into the mechanism of its destruction. Mid-morning brought the first signs of Hayes's direct response to the mounting crisis. A private telegraph message, intercepted by Catherine, revealed that the former colonel himself was en route to the valley, accompanied by his personal guard of selected military veterans. They called themselves the Ghost Company, Lieutenant Hawkins identified them after reviewing intelligence reports. Specialists in counterinsurgency operations, Hayes used them to hunt down deserters during the war. Lucas studied the implications of this development. Hayes's arrival would force his fractured organization to attempt coordinating their competing agendas, creating new vulnerabilities they could exploit. Through the mine's ventilation system, James Miller overheard the European specialists reacting to news of Hayes's approach. Their conversations revealed deeper layers of deception. Each national group had received different promises from the former colonel. The Austrians think they're getting exclusive mining rights, Sarah Miller reported. The French were promised control of railroad contracts. The Italians believe they'll secure water rights for future colonization. Two Hawks brought word of another significant development. His tribal scouts had detected a separate group shadowing Hayes's approach, professional manhunters hired by the railroad companies to protect their interests. Bounty killers from the Dakota Territory, he identified them, men who specialized in tracking renegade soldiers after the war. They're watching Hayes's movement, but waiting for something. In town, Eleanor Blackwood's dinner party produced unexpected intelligence when Professor Wright shared his preliminary findings with the European investors. His careful analysis of soil samples revealed traces of military-grade explosives in areas supposedly dedicated to routine mining operations. The chemical residue patterns are distinctive, Dr. Foster added, examining the data. They match demolition techniques taught at specific European military academies. Baron Kruger's reaction to this scientific evidence exposed new fractures in the European coalition. The Austrian military attaché immediately began implementing containment protocols that conflicted with French security measures. They're activating separate emergency plans, Michael observed, watching the resulting confusion. Each group follows different procedures for handling exposure of their operation. Mr. Chen's network discovered another crucial detail during this period of heightened activity. The European specialists had begun moving certain equipment to fallback positions, but each national group chose different locations based on their own tactical doctrines. They're dispersing their resources, Lucas noted, studying the pattern of movement, but doing it in ways that reveal their individual military training. The approaching Ghost Company forced Hayes's existing forces to modify their security arrangements. The Apache veterans particularly resented these changes, seeing them as a threat to their autonomous role in the organization. They're preparing their own response. Two Hawks interpreted their subtle signals, setting up observation posts that only they know about, preparing for whatever Hayes might bring with him. Catherine's position at the telegraph office yielded another vital piece of intelligence. The Ghost Company's reputation had triggered responses from unexpected quarters. Private security forces employed by various railroad and mining interests were converging on the valley. Corporate mercenaries, Lieutenant Hawkins identified them from the coded messages. Professional strikebreakers and corporate spies. They're here to protect their employers' investments from whatever Hayes is planning. The Smithsonian team's presence added another complication to this growing crisis. Professor Wright's archaeological authority forced Hayes's approaching forces to maintain their cover story even during military movements. They have to avoid disturbing potential artifact sites, Sarah Miller reported through their signal system. It's forcing them to use routes that compromise their tactical advantage. Dr. Foster's architectural expertise proved particularly problematic for the Europeans during this period. Her professional interest in their construction techniques required them to provide plausible explanations for military features disguised as mining infrastructure. Each explanation they invent contradicts their previous stories, Catherine noted after observing another awkward interaction. They're creating a documented record of their own deceptions. Martha Henderson's network adapted swiftly to these new developments. Her teenagers began shadowing the various private security forces entering the valley, using their intimate knowledge of the terrain to monitor multiple groups simultaneously. The arrival of corporate mercenaries created another unexpected advantage. Their presence forced Hayes's specialists to maintain surveillance on potential threats, while simultaneously hiding their own military nature from scientific observation. They're facing impossible choices, Michael assessed, watching another hasty reorganization create new vulnerabilities. They can't effectively monitor their enemies without exposing their own tactical positions. Lucas spotted increased activity around the mine's defensive positions. The European engineers were attempting to modify their fortifications to appear legitimate under both archaeological and corporate scrutiny, but their rushed work revealed telling details about their true purpose. Each modification compromises their original defensive plan, Lieutenant Hawkins explained. They're sacrificing military effectiveness for plausible deniability. James Miller's position inside the mine allowed him to observe how these external pressures affected the operation's internal dynamics. The specialist's attempts to prepare for Hayes's arrival while maintaining multiple deceptions created impossible coordination problems. Different groups are establishing independent command centers, he reported through their signal system. They don't trust the others to protect their interests when Hayes arrives. The Ghost Company's approach had another significant effect on Hayes's coalition. Each specialist group began positioning their most reliable men to guard critical resources, but their choices revealed competing priorities that further fractured the organization. Through their network of observers, they learned that Hayes's imminent arrival had triggered another kind of response. Local business interests, sensing the growing instability of his operation, began quietly withdrawing their support. The bank directors are covering their tracks, Caroline Preston reported, after monitoring their activities, destroying records of their involvement, preparing to deny any knowledge of Hayes's true purpose. Two Hawks brought word of new developments among the tribal observers. The native nations had begun coordinating their own response to Hayes's approach, sharing ancient knowledge of the landscape that would prove crucial in the coming confrontation. The tribes remember other military leaders who tried to control this valley, he explained. They're preparing to ensure history doesn't repeat itself. Professor Wright's team made another crucial discovery that further complicated the situation. Their excavation near the mine's eastern entrance uncovered evidence of recent grave sites, hastily concealed burials that suggested Hayes's operation had already eliminated potential witnesses. The soil disturbance patterns indicate multiple instruments, Dr. Foster documented clinically, all within the past 3 months, coinciding with increased mining activity. This discovery created an immediate crisis for the European specialists. The presence of human remains required formal investigation under territorial law, but they couldn't risk official scrutiny of the site. Baron Kruger attempted to handle the situation through diplomatic channels, claiming the area as protected under international mining agreements, but his intervention only drew more attention from unexpected quarters. The territorial medical examiner is on his way, Catherine reported from her position at the telegraph office. And he's bringing a team from the newly formed Bureau of Investigation. The imminent arrival of federal agents forced Hayes's organization to accelerate their timetable. Different factions began implementing emergency protocols, but their hasty preparations revealed crucial weaknesses in their structure. They're burning documents faster than they can check them, Sarah Miller observed from her position. Important operational plans are being destroyed, along with incriminating evidence. They're facing impossible choices, Michael assessed, watching another hasty reorganization create new vulnerabilities. They can't effectively monitor their enemies without exposing their own tactical positions. Lucas spotted increased activity around the mine's defensive positions. The European engineers were attempting to modify their fortifications to appear legitimate under both archaeological and corporate scrutiny, but their rushed work revealed telling details about their true purpose. Each modification compromises their original defensive plan, Lieutenant Hawkins explained. They're sacrificing military effectiveness for plausible deniability. James Miller's position inside the mine allowed him to observe how these external pressures affected the operation's internal dynamics. The specialists' attempts to prepare for Hayes's arrival while maintaining multiple deceptions created impossible coordination problems. Different groups are establishing independent command centers, he reported through their signal system. They don't trust the others to protect their interests when Hayes arrives. The Ghost Company's approach had another significant effect on Hayes's coalition. Each specialist group began positioning their most reliable men to guard critical resources, but their choices revealed competing priorities that further fractured the organization. Through their network of observers, they learned that Hayes's imminent arrival had triggered another kind of response. Local business interests, sensing the growing instability of his operation, began quietly withdrawing their support. "The bank directors are covering their tracks," Caroline Preston reported, after monitoring their activities, destroying records of their involvement, preparing to deny any knowledge of Hayes's true purpose. Two hawks brought word of new developments among the tribal observers. The native nations had begun coordinating their own response to Hayes's approach, sharing ancient knowledge of the landscape that would prove crucial in the coming confrontation. "The tribes remember other military leaders who tried to control this valley," he explained. "They're preparing to ensure history doesn't repeat itself." Professor Wright's team made another crucial discovery that further complicated the situation. Their excavation near the mine's eastern entrance uncovered evidence of recent grave sites, hastily concealed burials that suggested Hayes's operation had already eliminated potential witnesses. The soil disturbance patterns indicate multiple instruments, Dr. Foster documented clinically, all within the past 3 months, coinciding with increased mining activity. This discovery created an immediate crisis for the European specialists. The presence of human remains required formal investigation under territorial law, but they couldn't risk official scrutiny of the site. Baron Kruger attempted to handle the situation through diplomatic channels, claiming the area as protected under international mining agreements, but his intervention only drew more attention from unexpected quarters. "The territorial medical examiner is on his way," Catherine reported from her position at the telegraph office. "And he's bringing a team from the newly formed Bureau of Investigation." The imminent arrival of federal agents forced Hayes's organization to accelerate their timetable. Different factions began implementing emergency protocols, but their hasty preparations revealed crucial weaknesses in their structure. "They're burning documents faster than they can check them," Sarah Miller observed from her position. "Important operational plans are being destroyed along with incriminating evidence." Lucas spotted another significant development through his spyglass. The corporate mercenaries weren't just observing, they had begun establishing their own positions throughout the valley, creating a complex web of competing surveillance. Each company's security force is watching the others as much as Hayes's operation, Michael noted. "They're turning the valley into a chessboard of rival observers." The quiet rancher and the legendary gunfighter had achieved something remarkable, transforming Hayes's approach into a catalyst that would trigger the simultaneous collapse of multiple competing operations. Each group's desperate attempt to protect its own interests served only to expose the entire conspiracy to inevitable discovery. The approach of noon brought a development that changed the entire dynamic of the unfolding crisis. A telephone lineman conducting routine repairs inadvertently discovered a sophisticated wiretapping operation connected to Hayes's network. "They've been intercepting private communications throughout the territory," Catherine reported after examining the equipment. "But the real revelation is in their connection logs. They've been monitoring diplomatic cables between foreign consulates." This discovery immediately attracted attention from unexpected quarters. The State Department dispatched agents to investigate potential international espionage, adding another layer of official scrutiny to Hayes's already strained operation. "The diplomatic corps takes precedence over territorial authorities," Lieutenant Hawkins explained, watching the resulting confusion. "Their investigation can't be blocked or delayed by local officials." Through the mine's ventilation system, James Miller overheard the European specialists reacting to this new threat. Their panic revealed that the wiretapping operation had served multiple masters. Each national group had been secretly gathering intelligence on their supposed allies. The Austrians were monitoring French diplomatic traffic, Sarah Miller reported. The French were intercepting Italian communications. Each group spies on the others while working together. Two Hawks brought word of another significant development. His tribal scouts had detected unusual movement patterns among the corporate mercenaries. They were quietly withdrawing from certain areas, consolidating their positions. "They're preparing for something specific," he assessed. "Their new formations suggest they're expecting armed confrontation, but not from Hayes's direction." In town, Eleanor Blackwood's dinner party produced an unexpected revelation when Professor Wright shared his latest analysis. The soil samples from the grave sites contained traces of unique mineral deposits, connecting the burials to specific mining operations across the territory. Each victim can be traced to a different corporate acquisition, Dr. Foster explained, reviewing the evidence, creating a pattern that reveals the full scope of Hayes's expansion. Baron Kruger's reaction to these discoveries exposed new vulnerabilities in the European operation. The Austrian military attaché began implementing containment protocols that directly interfered with ongoing intelligence gathering. "They're sacrificing valuable sources to protect against exposure," Michael observed, watching their hasty reorganization, cutting off their own access to critical information. Chen's network identified another crucial detail during this period of heightened activity. The European specialists had established separate communication systems, each using different encryption methods that revealed their true military affiliations. "The coding patterns match specific army units," Catherine decoded. "French Alpine Corps, Austrian Border Guards, Italian colonial forces, each group maintaining connections to their home commands." The imminent arrival of State Department investigators forced Hayes's organization to accelerate their timetable. Different factions began implementing emergency measures, but their hasty execution created new problems. "They're moving sensitive equipment without proper preparation," James Miller reported through their signal system. "Critical components being damaged or left behind in their rush." Lucas spotted increased activity around the mine's communication center. The European engineers were attempting to dismantle their wiretapping operation while preserving essential intelligence, but their efforts revealed telling patterns. "Each group is prioritizing different information," Lieutenant Hawkins noted. "What the French consider crucial intelligence, the Austrians are frantically destroying." Martha Henderson's network adapted swiftly to these new developments. Her teenagers began tracking the movement of destroyed documents, piecing together crucial details from discarded fragments. The State Department's involvement created another unexpected advantage. Their authority forced Hayes's specialists to maintain diplomatic courtesy while simultaneously trying to conceal evidence of international espionage. "They're trapped by protocol," Caroline Preston observed after monitoring several interactions. "Can't risk diplomatic incidents by obstructing federal agents, but can't allow unfettered access to their operation." Sarah Miller noticed how these pressures affected the organization's internal dynamics. The specialists' attempts to protect national interests while maintaining their coalition created impossible contradictions. "Different groups are establishing independent fallback positions," she reported, "but their choices reveal military doctrines that identify their true affiliations." The discovery of diplomatic espionage had another significant effect on Hayes's operation. Each specialist group began carefully editing their communications, but their changes exposed patterns that revealed their actual capabilities. Through their observation network, they learned that foreign consulates had begun conducting their own investigations. Diplomatic staff, disguised as routine visitors, arrived to assess potential security breaches. "The consular investigations can't be controlled through local authorities," Catherine explained after monitoring official channels. "They operate under international protocols that bypass territorial jurisdiction." Two Hawks brought word of new developments among the corporate mercenaries. Their withdrawal patterns suggested inside knowledge of impending diplomatic complications. They're creating distance between themselves and Hayes's operation. He interpreted their movements, preparing to deny any connection when the international investigations begin. Professor Wright's team made another discovery that further complicated the situation. Their analysis of communication equipment revealed modifications that could only have been made by someone with advanced military training. These adaptations match classified designs. Lieutenant Hawkins identified them, prototypes that were never officially deployed. Someone in Hayes's organization has access to restricted military technology. The quiet rancher and the legendary gunfighter had created an unprecedented situation. The discovery of diplomatic espionage transformed their local conflict into an international incident, forcing Hayes's organization to confront impossible choices. Each specialist group's attempt to protect national interests while maintaining operational security only served to expose their true nature. The very skills and connections that made them valuable to Hayes's operation became evidence of their military origins. Through the midday sun, Lucas could see their strategy's effectiveness in every panicked response, every compromised position, every revelation of hidden purpose. Hayes was approaching with his elite ghost company, but he would find an organization paralyzed by the competing demands of multiple international investigations. The situation had evolved beyond mere territorial control. They had forced Hayes's carefully constructed operation into a position where its own expertise became a liability. Each specialist's attempt to manage the crisis only generated more evidence of the conspiracy they were trying to conceal. As Hayes's elite ghost company finally arrived on the outskirts of the valley, the full weight of the crisis became evident. Every faction involved, corporate, military, diplomatic, and criminal, had reached a tipping point. Their once covert operations were now under scrutiny from multiple angles, with their own actions betraying them more than any outside force ever could. James Miller, still positioned inside the mine, relayed the last desperate measures of Hayes's inner circle. They're cutting direct communication lines and switching to signal flares, he reported. They don't trust their own channels anymore. Lucas, watching through his spyglass, spotted a flurry of movement near the fortified mining headquarters. They're shifting critical personnel into prepared escape routes, he observed. This isn't just a retreat, it's a planned abandonment. Sarah Miller, monitoring the telegraph office, confirmed their suspicions. The bank directors are transferring their final assets out of regional accounts, she noted. They're liquidating holdings before they can be linked to Hayes's operation. Meanwhile, Two Hawks and his scouts observed a significant shift among the corporate mercenaries. They're disengaging from security posts, he reported, leaving only token forces behind to maintain appearances. Professor Wright's team made one final breakthrough as they examined abandoned documents left behind in the mine's hurried evacuation. These are coded financial records, Dr. Foster deduced. They show direct payments from European governments to corporate front companies. Catherine, using her expertise in cryptanalysis, worked quickly to decode the remaining transmissions. This proves everything, she said. The European powers weren't just funding Hayes, they were competing to use him as their foothold. In this territory, as federal investigators, diplomatic agents, and local authorities closed in, the valley became a stage for a grand unraveling. Each competing faction made desperate final attempts to salvage what they could. Baron Kruger arranged a last-minute diplomatic appeal claiming sovereign immunity for his personnel. The French and Italian specialists burned their most incriminating evidence, leaving only fragments to be reconstructed by forensic teams. The Austrians attempted to reframe their involvement as purely observational, despite overwhelming evidence to the contrary, but the deception could not hold. Hayes's arrival, meant to unify his operation and impose control, instead served as the final catalyst for collapse. His elite ghost company, expecting to take command of a well-oiled machine, found itself stepping into a chaotic mess of betrayal, infighting, and abandonment. Lieutenant Hawkins and Michael, watching from their hidden vantage points, shared an unspoken understanding. "They're done," Hawkins said simply. "This isn't a fight anymore. It's a reckoning." Eleanor Blackwood's network ensured that no one escaped unseen. Her connections at the telegraph and rail stations confirmed which figures were attempting to flee under assumed identities. Caroline Preston, still monitoring financial movements, ensured that international investigators received all necessary information to track stolen assets. Martha Henderson's network of teenagers played a final role in documenting the chaos, collecting discarded letters, listening in on hurried conversations, and mapping last-minute escape attempts. The evidence they gathered would provide prosecutors with an airtight case against the conspirators who thought they could disappear into the shadows. As the sun set over the valley, Hayes stood at the center of the ruined operation he had spent years building. His forces, once a feared and disciplined entity, had been compromised before they had even fired a shot. The arrival of federal agents, coupled with diplomatic scrutiny and local resistance, left him with no good options. Two hawks, standing on the ridgeline, watched as the tribal observers gathered. "We don't need to act," he said to his people. "They've destroyed themselves." Lucas, lowering his spyglass, nodded in agreement. "We didn't defeat them," he remarked. "We just forced them to reveal what they really were." And as the valley settled into an eerie stillness, the legendary gunfighter and the quiet rancher shared a final glance. The battle had never been about bullets and blood. It had been about exposing the truth. And in that, they had already won. As the first stars began to appear overhead, the valley's remaining inhabitants emerged from hiding. The ranchers, miners, and traders who had been forced into silence watched as the last remnants of Hayes's forces abandoned their positions. A few tried to slip away unnoticed, but the combined forces of local law enforcement, federal agents, and tribal scouts intercepted them at every turn. Professor Wright's team continued their work, now operating under official protection. Their excavation of the grave sites provided further evidence that would ensure justice was served. Dr. Foster's team reconstructed the financial trail, linking corrupt officials to the larger conspiracy. And Catherine worked tirelessly to ensure that every intercepted message made it into the right hands. In the coming weeks, newspapers across the country would carry the story of the valley's liberation. Political scandals erupted as names were linked to Hayes's operation. International tensions flared as the involvement of foreign governments was laid bare. But in the valley itself, a sense of peace returned. Lucas stood at the edge of his land, surveying the horizon. "Reckon things'll quiet down for a while," he murmured. Michael holstered his revolver and nodded. "For now," he agreed. "But there's always another storm coming." The two men shared a final moment of understanding before parting ways, one to his ranch, the other to the unknown. The valley had been saved, but the world beyond still had its dangers, and some battles never truly end. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.